Hi there, this is Chris from Criminal Minds. Thank you for dropping by the channel. I just wanted to put out this video really to kind of balance things out with regards to the Chris Watts case, of course, which, as we know, is constantly talked about every day in every single corner of YouTube, which is fine. It's going to be a very high profile case which has captivated a lot of people, but I feel sorry for the people that may be new to the case or have come from Facebook or other social media sites, and they drop into YouTube looking for answers to sort of understand Chris Watts' motives and why he did what he did, why he killed his family, who he seemed to love so much. And instead of these kind of insights and those kind of videos, they get just led into conspiracy theory land and down contrived rabbit holes, and they're forced to take in baseless speculation and hearsay, and they end up just getting totally confused. I see it happen a lot. I see it happen in comments, and particularly people on Facebook who say, I wish I never ever went on to YouTube to look into this case. And I think that's a shame, because I think there is a lot that can be learnt from this case, and the reasons for why he did what he did, in my opinion. And I think it's sad that people are just still pushing all of these baseless theories. I mean, it's clear now, I think, to most people that it's just to keep the views coming in, keep the clicks coming in, keeps money coming in off of the name of this case, and that's very sad, particularly when you got the victim's family saying, look guys, we asked law enforcement to turn over every single stone. That was our family, there was nobody else involved. Please stop with all of this BS, for want of a better word. But there you go. I think it's sad that Shanann's family have to do that, but still people just go on and on and on. And there just seems to be this sort of few thousand people that go around all of the Watts channels now, on YouTube, just creating drama and clickbait headlines. And as we all know, most sensible people know, this case was closed a long time ago. It was closed back in November 2018 when Chris Watts pled, and there's never going to be any breaking news. I wouldn't say that if I wasn't sure of that. I wouldn't put myself in that position. There's never going to be any breaking news. The only breaking news you'll hear is stuff that creators have decided to try and sell you by spinning a narrative and fabricating this, that and the other, and trying to convince you that this is actually evidence against somebody. It's never going to happen. So I'm going to give my opinion. I can only say that, kind of my opinion of what happened. I think most people are now coming around to the realisation that Chris Watts did act alone. I've always thought that. Nothing's ever convinced me that anybody else was involved, particularly Nicole Kessinger. Yes, she was a very fundamental player in the whole story. Of course she was. She wanted Chris Watts all for herself. She didn't care less, to be honest, for his wife and his children, his marriage. She just wanted Chris. And of course, she was pushing him, she was manipulating him, doing everything she could to get him to have him all to herself. So of course she's going to be a fundamental part of the story, but I don't believe personally that she was criminally involved in any way, and I have trust in FBI, CBI, law enforcement in America, that they would be able to tell when somebody is covering something up or lying. I'd rather believe them than a YouTuber, certainly, and that includes me, of course. But I've always thought from the beginning, and people on this channel the same, most of them, that Nicole Kessinger or anybody else wasn't involved. So I'm gonna give my theory, and I hope people listen to this. I hope you listen to it all. and maybe it'll make you think, maybe it will help you maybe to put this case to bed. A lot of people that have said, I just had to walk away from this case, but they end up coming back because they still feel that there's something not right, something missing. But to me, it was very simple, and I think the law enforcement had it absolutely spot on with what they concluded at the end. So this is my theory of what happened. This is after sort of 2.5 years of research, really, and kind of the position that we've been in. We got involved with Shanann's family quite early on in trying to help them to stop the exploitation. We kind of had indirect contact with them. I've spoken to Chris Watts' sister Jamie, always made it very clear to them where I stand, and that everything they've said and done is completely wrong. But we've kind of maintained a cordial relationship, if you like. But they know exactly where I stand on things, and that's exactly what you'll hear from me on the channel and in videos discussing this case. But for anybody, who's looking for answers in this case, there's only one person, in my opinion, that you need to be looking at, and that is Chris Watts. He is to blame for the choices that he made, the decisions that he made. I don't believe anybody else is to blame for what happened. I hear people saying maybe he was drugged, brainwashed, whatever. Just look at him in his interviews, listen to him, look at his TV appeal, his porch interview. He looked absolutely fine. He was coherent, lucid. You could tell he wasn't being coerced in any way. He said he wasn't coerced in any way. He's told us that he wasn't coerced. When he finally confessed to his lawyers, he decided to do that. It's Chris Watts is the reason why there was no trial, because he didn't want one. He went to his defence team, held his hands up, said, look guys, this is what I actually did, told them. They then came up with a plea deal just to save his life. That's basically all they could do. And he took it, of course he did. He wanted to save himself. Always thinks about himself. I can understand why people look elsewhere. Because of the evidence and you listen to interviews and people speaking and what have you, and certain things, pieces of evidence that make you kind of raise your eyebrows a bit. And I think the two main reasons for that are the obvious ones, really. Firstly, I think it's too frightening for some people to believe that actually Chris Watts could have done something like this all by himself. I think a lot of people, probably particularly women, are too scared to come to that realisation because he seems such a normal, nice guy. They're probably looking at their husbands thinking, well, my partner's a nice, normal guy, what the hell. So I think it's too scary for them to come to that realisation. In a way, it's you could consider it irresponsible that some people are still pushing this fact that he didn't do it alone, the fact that he's innocent, even some people are saying. They're trying to convince you there's no way he could have done it. Look at Chris Watts, there's no way he could have done it. Couldn't have done that all by himself. And I think in a way that's probably, that could be considered quite irresponsible, to make people think that it's not possible that somebody like Chris Watts could have done what he did. But to me, if you're looking for answers to this, if you're trying to put to bed, if you're trying to fit that final jigsaw puzzle piece in, and you're looking for the red flags, it's Chris Watts that you need to be looking at. All of this focusing on other people being involved, you're just distancing yourself and you're getting further away from where you really, in my opinion, need to be looking for the answers as to what happened and why it happened. Secondly, of course, one of the big reasons that people can't give it up, of course, is Nicole Kessinger and her suspect behaviour. And people just seem to hate this woman, right? The amount of comments I see where, as soon as her name mentioned, that trashy hoe, that skank, that disgusting woman, there seems to be this real kind of underpinning of real hatred for this woman. I don't know if people are particularly women maybe are projecting some of their insecurities onto her, some of their fears onto her. You know, they take mickey out of her voice, how horrible she sounds. And that's fine, I guess, if that's people's opinions, but to me it just seems a little bit over the top sometimes, and a little bit unfair. At the end of the day, she has been cleared by law enforcement, you know, one of the top agencies in the world, in the FBI, so that's got to mean something, right? But yes, she did have clear intent to play down her role. She did, you know, play down her role in the affair, her behaviour, her role in the whole thing. Of course, she did lie. She lied to a certain degree in her interviews. She tried to manipulate the whole situation. She tried to control her own exit out of it. But I believe there are reasons for that. Putting myself in her shoes, I can see why she did it. And I do believe that a lot of women would have done exactly the same thing given the circumstances. You know, she'd really intertwined herself into Chris's life, put herself right in the middle of him and his marriage, and she wanted him. And I think she most likely, as I'll speak about in a bit, she gave probably an ultimatum that, you know, it's me or your family, make a decision. And so I think after the murders, or after Shanann family disappeared, I think she probably panicked and thought, this is going to look really bad on me, what's happened. And I think she panicked and then started deleting stuff. Of course, she had all the sex content and photos as well. The phone ping, at the end of the day, when you look at it, it wasn't a ping that she didn't know about. It wasn't like a GPS ping. It was on her call log. So she actually made a call. She made that call at 6:16 a.m. from Frederick to Jim. To me, if she really was clever enough to look up about police and how long they keep texts and all that kind of thing, I don't think she would have been stupid enough to make a call from Frederick at 6:16 a.m. Personally, I don't think she would have done that. I think she was probably, it was all coming to a head, the affair and everything. She probably was nosy on by the house. She knew that Chris was going to survey early that morning, which was kind of unlike him, to go there at that kind of time, doing that kind of job, I think. And she knew Shanann was coming home, of course. I think she was getting suspicious of what was going on. She was being nosy. She wanted to see. She drove by probably to see if Chris was there. Maybe if Shanann had come home, I don't know. But I think, to me, I think too much is being read into that. Yes, of course, she's deleted her texts and what have you. Chris didn't delete all of his, though. They got some of them back. There's ways they can get all the texts back. So I think there are reasons for these things that people point out, although people, of course, blow them right up into something that's a lot more than what it is. And don't forget, of course, at 6:16 a.m, Chris was well on his way to Service 319. As I say, you know, whatever people keep saying, people can keep talking about it and talking about this case and saying this, that and the other and blah blah blah. This person's being arrested tomorrow, you know, and I heard this. At the end of the day, the case is closed. We know that. Dave Baumhofer, the lead detective, has told us that on his blog, which he had to give up because he probably got drawn and attacked into all of this conspiracy stuff, probably rained down on him because people just, I don't know, they just seem to be nuts surrounding this case. Chris Watts pled. That's the reason there was no trial, there was no cover-up, no conspiracy, no corruption. Chris Watts went to his defence team and told them what he did a week or so after his first confession, which we know, of course, was just a load of BS because he took the bait that was given him by Tammy Lee. So the reason there's no trial is Chris Watts. Chris Watts is to blame for that. He didn't want a trial. He was too scared, in my opinion, to face a trial. He knew what was going to come out in that trial. He knew that his whole nice guy image, right, was going to be completely shattered. He knew that the Chris Watts monster that he hides so well was going to be unveiled to the world, and he didn't want that. The last thing he wanted was that. So he took the plea deal to save his life. Win-win for him. He gets to keep his life. Nobody sees what a monster he is. For that reason, there's never going to be any breaking news on this case. There's never been any breaking news since he confessed in February 2019. Has there been any breaking news? I don't really think there has, is there? And one of the things that people always use as an excuse or to try and twist things, is they say that Shanann's family have said, stop talking about the case. Don't talk about the case. Which is a complete twist on what they've actually said. All they've actually said is, please just stop the BS. Stop all this BS about conspiracies, corruption, accomplices. Please just talk about the case. Talk about the facts that are in the discovery. Please just talk about it respectfully. In doing what they're doing, which they're doing obviously to try and get clicks and money, they're even now getting people going to the family saying, you don't even want justice for Shanann and the children. We do. You don't want justice. You've took money to be quiet. That's a sort of reaction, a knock-on effect that this kind of stuff has by creating these crazy conspiracies. And it's just not on. It's just, in my book, it's just not acceptable. You shouldn't be allowed to do this kind of thing, to create these kind of problems on YouTube. It's not, in my opinion, what it was created for. It's not a platform that should allow that. And I think Google really do need to step up and actually take some action on this and follow their terms, their policies that they've set in place. So I don't believe any, and I personally don't believe any of this BS. There was a red car, it looks red. To put this in the simplest terms, it's Betty's car. Only one car. No car is ever seen arriving at the house that night, apart from Nicole Atkinson when she dropped Shanann off. That's it. When did this supposed red car arrive there? Please tell me that. Then maybe I'll start listening to people that say there was another car there, a red car, an accomplice car. Well, it was never seen arriving there. So what are you talking about? It wasn't there when Shanann got home on the doorbell cam. So when did it exactly get there? How did it magically appear there and avoid Nate's CCTV? Don't believe it for a second. It's the reflection from Chris Watts' truck reflecting on the side of Betty's vehicle, which is a grey colour. Have anyone who argues this point that it's a red car, has anyone actually ever looked into or tested the effect of light reflection in a dark situation, particularly a bright colour and a very bright rear brake light on another vehicle? Has anyone ever kind of looked into that or tested it? I suspect not. They just go with what they see, go with what they're told. The only person seen on that camera is Chris Watts. All of these people that are supposed to be in the basement, how did they all get there? No one's ever seen any of these people on camera, right? They all seem to have managed to get in the house, but nobody's seen them on camera. And don't forget, we now know, Shanann's family have mentioned this. They had the Vivint security system. All the windows, all the doors had sensors on them. There was no suspect activity, as far as we know, from the Vivint system. Don't forget, these systems also tell you when they are switched off, these security systems. There's no mention in the discovery that the Vivint system was ever switched off. So how do all these people get in and out the house, in and out the basement through the back windows without tripping any of these Vivint sensors? It's impossible to happen. It can't happen. This is all the YouTube scam circus version of the case. It's like there's the actual reality of what happened, and there's the YouTube created version of events, that include all the spins, the twists, the narratives, the so-called evidence that they like to create by manipulating videos or spinning facts, visual, changing what you see into something. I mean, you can look in a cloud, right, and see animals. Doesn't mean to say they're animals. Do you know what I mean? But anyway, I'm getting off topic. So, Chris Watts, okay, if you're looking for an answer, that's where you need to be focusing. And who actually sits and discusses Chris Watts? All of these creators on YouTube that like to keep this case spinning around, right, to keep their views and money coming in, do they actually sit and discuss the man himself that actually committed this atrocious act? Nobody does. Nobody even looks and studies his behaviour. It's no wonder people are struggling to come up with a conclusion that will allow them to kind of leave this case behind, if you like. I mean, let's look at Chris Watts. Okay, he's a man who clearly struggles to deal with his emotions, right? He struggles to process his emotions. He struggles to deal with them, to show them. He's almost like a robot, kind of very shallow human, right? He seems totally disconnected from his emotions. I mean, he showed that when he was talking about, after the event, after we know what he did, talking about his family, just knowing they were dead, no emotion, no tears, nothing, right? He's very quiet. He plays a very submissive role, and I think he's very well practiced in stuffing down, hiding his feelings, any negative emotions he has, any stress, any resentment, anger. He's very good at just stuffing that down inside of him, not showing it. He's very non-confrontational. He said that himself. He doesn't like confrontation. He hates it. He would always rather avoid that. He'd always rather say nothing, say yes, just to have a quiet life. He's very submissive. He's a yes man. And it seems emotionally he's lacking in emotional intelligence, really. I mean, what I say, he struggles to deal with his feelings, his emotions, but he's very good at hiding that. He's very good at appearing to be normal, level-headed, and in control of himself. I don't think he'd ever let on to anyone, what kind of emotional turmoil that he may be in. He's very good at hiding that. He's almost like an empty shell, really, isn't he? He's almost, when he talks, when he was given his confession, it's almost robotic. It's very cold. It's very devoid of empathy, devoid of any real genuine feelings, really. But of course, this has a downside. Pushing down, stuffing all these emotions, these feelings, isn't healthy, and they have to come out in some way. Some feelings and real strong emotions you can't just stuff down and they disappear. They will fester. They will fester in your gut, in your head. And given the right circumstances, when you've got too much of that going on and you're trying to stuff it all down, eventually something's going to give, and it's going to come out in probably a really bad way. It's going to explode, and in this case, of course, we've seen the tragic circumstances and what happened. Now, before, I thought Chris Watts was a psychopath. I thought, this guy is psychopathic. Look what he did. But on reflection, you can't really diagnose. Well, you can't diagnose somebody on a single event in their life, right? You've got to look back through their whole life and look at their behaviour from when they were very young, growing up, events in their life, that kind of stuff. You can't diagnose somebody on just a single event. And I think a lot of people, me included in the beginning, were trying to diagnose Chris on what he's done, in annihilating his family. But referring to him as a psychopath doesn't look correct, because generally a psychopath's life, looking through their life, would be chaotic, disorderly. There would be history of antisocial behaviour. They would be the sort of child that would be causing disrupt at school. They're the sort of child that would be pulling wings off flies and killing insects. Sometimes they continue on to kill animals and that kind of stuff. And we don't really hear or see any of that in Chris Watts' life. We certainly haven't heard anything like that from his family. You know, he's a wonderful man, a fantastic person, of course, according to his family, but we don't see any of that in Chris, do we? And so I struggle to think of him as a psychopath, to be perfectly honest. He doesn't really come across that way, but of course what he did can absolutely be considered the act of a psychopath. You know, it's almost like he had a psychotic break from reality, and he did. And that's what I think happened here. He reached a point where his emotions just completely overloaded on him, and he had a psychotic episode, if you like. I mean, some people may even consider it sociopathic, because he was able to put aside his feelings of everybody else to do what he did and to gain from doing what he did. You know, in his mind he was fixing a problem for himself, and he was going to come out of it getting what he wanted. So in a way that could be considered a sociopathic act. So you've got to look at why he did it. That's the big question, isn't it? Why did he do what he did? Why annihilate your wife and your children and your unborn son just to be with somebody else? You know, what was he thinking and feeling before he did what he did? What was he feeling during it? What was he feeling after? Something in his mind obviously told him that this was a good idea. Right? To him it was a reasonable solution to his problems. And I think he just simply, as I mentioned earlier, he lacks the intelligence to realise that he would get away with it. I think he's almost stupid. You know, he's cold and stupid. He's not as clever as people seem to make out he is. He may have a good memory or whatever, but he is not an intelligent man. I mean, this was a terrible planning of whatever he thought he was going to get away with. It was never going to happen, thank God. So what caused him to do this? Right? What was he thinking? What was he feeling? And when I talk about it in this part, I'm talking from what I consider to be the mind of Chris Watts, right, from his perception. This is not my personal feelings. This is taken in the discovery, taken in the interviews and all of that. You know, it's really important that we don't project our own thoughts and emotions onto somebody else when we're trying to get into somebody else's mind and as to why they did what they did. So I'm talking in the perception of Chris here. You know, these aren't my thoughts or my judgments. So I think that Chris probably found himself thinking, I'm not happy. I'm not happy in this marriage. And I think that went back to before he had the affair. I think, although he said until I met Kessinger, I didn't think there was anything wrong with my marriage. I don't think that's strictly true. And I think he was looking for somebody else and putting himself out there slightly to meet somebody else. I think he was unhappy for longer than what he said. I'm almost certain of that. And so I think he found himself in this marriage that he was unhappy in. And I don't think, of course, he wouldn't have let on to anybody that was the case. Everyone else would have thought there's nothing wrong here. But I think he was, and I don't think he had the gumption or the emotional strength to do anything about it. I think from listening to him, I think he, in his mind, he maybe felt slightly emasculated, ignored, taken for granted. I think maybe he felt he was being controlled. And we do know, Nicole Atkins has said that Shanann could come across as a bit bossy, and I'm not saying this in a negative way whatsoever, but I think in Chris's mind, because he was so weak, he would just let Shanann make all the decisions and what have you, quite happily, but then the other part of his mind would tell him that, this isn't fair, I'm being controlled here, because he was so weak and submissive. We know he wasn't comfortable with the social media stuff, with all the stuff that Shanann did on Facebook, getting him on video. We know he didn't like that. And we know also it's a fact that Chris and Shanann were struggling financially. That's no secret. That's in the discovery. They were financially stretched. And I think that Chris blamed Shanann for that. I think he blamed her for overspending, and I think he resented it for her for that. And I think towards the end he would have been looking for reasons to resent her and reasons to be angry with her and dislike her. And I think all these things that he was building up in himself to resent his wife, because he was unhappy, and he was trying to justify to himself reasons for being unhappy. I also think that he felt Shanann was driving a wedge between him and his family, which we know now that Cindy and Watts' family really didn't like Shanann. I think that's pretty clear. Very unfairly judged her, were really harsh on her, and in part I think that is to do with Chris. I think Chris was probably feeding them all of these stories and lies about, particularly towards the end, about how horrible Shanann had been to him, and how she was causing him problems and causing the family problems. And then you've got Chris's family echoing it. They didn't like her. They would go along with that, I'm sure. And I think Chris just twisted this all around in his head to himself, to think, Shanann's causing this massive problem between, me and my family, and he just didn't understand how to fix it. He didn't know what to do to try and help. I think he just, he would tell his family probably one thing, think to himself another thing. I think he was just completely confused by it all. I mean, even at what was he, 33 at the time? He was still being judged by his mother. He was still being put under pressure about his marriage by his mother, even at that age. So I think he just found himself completely caught in the middle of this family situation and not know what to do about it. And I think he would sometimes play on that. I think he would take side with his family and tell them, how awful Shanann was to him sometimes, and because he knew that would garner support from his family, and he knew, of course, that they would back him up because they didn't like Shanann anyway. So it's just a whole toxic situation going on there with Chris, his family, and how they felt towards Shanann. And I think towards the end he probably felt, with all of this going on, he probably felt in himself that he was completely trapped. He was controlled by this position that he found himself in. That he put himself in, I hasten to add, he put himself in this position by having the affair. And as I mentioned earlier, I think he lacked the emotional strength, the emotional intelligence to deal with what was going on around him. He finds himself in this position kind of between three very strong-willed women. He's got his mum, Cindy, who doesn't like his wife, always judging him, telling him, he's just this great guy, and probably how could anyone be horrible to him, and everything he touches turns to gold, right, according to his mum. The whole world's probably against him, but he's such a nice guy. You've got his mistress, of course, Nicole Kessinger, who's manipulating him, telling him all the right things, trying to, get him away from his wife. She wants him, right? So he's got that side of it, and then of course he's got his wife, who he's probably growing to hate and resent because he feels that she's put him in this situation and he's unhappy, and it's all because of her. When of course we saw towards the end Shanann was doing nothing but to try and save their marriage. She realised kind of late on what was going on, and she even realised her own faults. She realised that she was maybe being too hard on him, was making him feel less of a man, if you like, and she picked up on that towards the end. She was doing everything she could to try and save this marriage. All the time Chris was resenting her and blaming everything on her. So Chris finds himself caught between these three women, and let's not forget, Chris was the married one, right? He was the one who'd taken his vows and was cheating. For all the immorality that Nicole Kessinger displayed, of course, Chris was the one who was actually married. And Chris, being so submissive, can't deal with personal conflicts, can't deal with his situations, he can't deal with his personal feelings. He's being manipulated by and doted on by Nicole Kessinger. I think all of this going on, I think it just broke him mentally, and I think he reached a point where he felt he was in a situation where he couldn't just sit back and do nothing and nod and say yes. It wasn't that kind of situation. Now he had to make decisions, and he couldn't. He lacked the emotional strength and intelligence to do that. And I think in his mind, that's when he decided that he needed an exit and out. And to him, to annihilate his family, an absolute evil act to any normal person, to him it seemed like a rational decision, and he wouldn't have to face his wife and have this massive confrontation, this massive fight, and tell her that he was having an affair. I think that's the whole reason he used the dinner at the Lazy Dog, paying on the card, because he knew that Shanann would know something wasn't right, but he wouldn't have to. It was an icebreaker for him. He wouldn't have to face her and tell her that he was seeing somebody else and he wanted to leave her. That kind of broke the ice for him, because he hates confrontation. That's why he did it. And I think by the time of the murders, he convinced himself, as I mentioned earlier, that Shanann was the problem. He started to distance himself, convince himself in his mind, give him reason to do what he was planning to do. Of course, Shanann was completely blindsided by all of this, as we tragically saw at the end. She was doing everything she could to try and save the marriage, including recognising her own potential faults and the way that she realised she was maybe making Chris feel. Tragically then, it was too late. Chris had already made his mind up, and I think by then he probably had a real growing resentment, not only for his wife, but I think for his children. I think he almost saw his children as an extension of Shanann rather than his children. I think he convinced himself in his mind of this, and he distanced himself from his children, from his wife, so that he could do what he did. It made it easier for him to do what he did. And he's got Kessinger, completely contrasting relationship to his marriage and to Shanann, and his commitments to the family and the children, being a married man, a father. He's got Nicole Kessinger listening to him, telling him he can do what he wants to do. She's manipulating him, she's giving him lots of sex, everything that he thinks life's great, this is what life should be about. Of course, it all happened in the 6 weeks when Shanann was away, which just was a very unnatural situation. But of course, he's telling her he's in the process of a separation. He's lying to her constantly. She's lying to him, most likely. And they're both a pair of manipulative liars, basically, that played each other. And they both got burned. And tragically, it was Chris's family that paid the ultimate price. I think Kessinger was almost like a drug to him, and I think he just couldn't. He just lacked the wit and the awareness and intelligence to get himself out of the situation, put everything in context, and make rational decisions. He had a taste of life without a wife and children. All the things that he was resenting at that time in his life, he had a taste of life without all of that. And under pressure from Nicole Kessinger, I think he was forced to make a decision. And tragically, of course, we know how it all ended. But as I say, I think he was also lying to her. I mean, we know that he deleted his Facebook. He was even trying to tell Nicole Kessinger at the end that Nico wasn't his. That was a length of lies that he was going to try not to upset Nicole Kessinger and try to keep her, on his side. But of course, as much as I think that Nicole Kessinger wasn't criminally involved, absolutely I do think that she believed. I believe that she knew a lot more than she let on, and she was very manipulative, very self-serving, very much in damage limitation as things unfolded. But as far as Chris was concerned, I think the only solution he could come up with in his mind, because he's so stupid and so emotionally detached, and socially awkward, and just he didn't know what the hell to do. It was almost like a child, to get what he wanted, to probably in his mind restore his relationship with his family, to put an end to all of his worries, his financial worries. In his mind, his decision was to remove his family from his life. And the fact that he was able to do that with no empathy for anyone, really, but for him, for anybody, so coldly, that's what people would consider very much the act of a sociopath and very narcissistic. Because in his mind, he was the one that was set to gain from all of this. He was doing it for him. He was doing it for him to sort out his problems. And to hell with everybody else. And that again goes back to the fact that Chris Watts simply has the inability to process his emotions, to deal with his emotions. But he does have the ability, when he needs to show zero empathy for anybody else. Especially if he's going after something that he can gain from, and it will solve his problems. Very self-centered. As for what actually happened, I think people just need to listen to Chris's confessions. Forget the first confession. People say, he's made 3 confessions, how many more is he going to make? Forget the first one. It was put to him on a plate by Tammy Lee, and he ran with it. He's told us that. And it was obvious when you watched the interview. He blamed his wife. We all knew it was complete lies anyway. 99.9% of people could see that was complete lies. The second confession, his prison interview in February 2019. That's the confession. That's what you need to listen to if you want to know what happened. To me, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever that Chris would make any of that up. Why would you make something like that up? To make you look like a complete monster, even more of a monster than people already think of you. And as for the so-called third confession, he just added to his second confession. In letters to Sherilyn Cadle, he just added on things to what he'd already told us. He just added on the fact that he'd already tried to suffocate the children and they woke back up. He just added to his confession in prison. So I don't think there's all the forget the first confession he made in prison. The second confession, so-called, is what you need to listen to. His letters to Sharon and Cadle, he merely added to it. And he's probably only told us 95% of everything. I believe there's probably something else that he's not telling us. But it's just something that will make him look even worse, in my opinion. And to be honest, I don't even wish to know if he's got anything else, if he's hiding anything else. Because that's what it will simply be to do with some sick thing that he did that he hasn't told us. As we know, it was premeditated. He's told us that when Nikki told him that she wanted to give him a boy, he started thinking about it. He poisoned Shanann with oxycodone in North Carolina. He's confessed to that, and that adds up with her being sick there, and how she looked at one of her last photographs. But of course, although it was premeditated, I think it was extremely badly planned. Thank God. And that fact alone furthers my strength that I think he acted alone. I think if Nicole Kessinger had anything to do with this, she would have, with her kind of personality, I think she would have planned everything to the nth detail. I mean, what exactly did these accomplices supposedly were they supposed to do? I mean, they left everything. They left Shanann's belongings. That has her purse, her medication, her phone was all left, right? I mean, what part of a plan was that? Left the sheet at the oil site. The sheet was left in the bin at the home. I mean, Chris was the only one seen coming out on camera. Chris's truck, GPS from his truck, took him to the site where the bodies were found. I think his work offered him a perfect place, to put the bodies. I think the oil drums offered him a place he thought the children would never be found. I think probably he was going to go back and probably move Shanann somewhere else. And he tried to hide this crime just within. He thought he could just hide it within the normalities of his working day. He just thought, look at me, look at me, it couldn't have been me, I was at work all day. He thought he could just, everything had to be normal. I don't think it was a coincidence that he left at 5:15. I think he made sure that Betty saw him. That would help give him an alibi for the morning. He thought he could just hide it within the confines of his day. Look at me, I was at work. I went to work. I quickly got rid of the bodies there and carried on with my work. He thought he would never be suspected. Probably he was then going to use Shanann's phone to text people and what have you. Of course, that was foiled by Shanann changing her PIN code. And of course, as we know, the whole plan was foiled by Nicole Atkinson calling the police. I mean, that completely put a massive spanner in his works, and he was caught pretty quickly. I think he was too stupid anyway to get away with this, but that certainly didn't give him a minute's peace. And thank God for Nicole, it completely destroyed any plan that he had of trying to cover it up. So the lighter, the gas can, what have you, I think that shows you there was no intention of an oil explosion. I mean, as soon as the insurance company would have seen that would have been the end of any insurance claim, because there's no way you're allowed to take fuel onto a work site such as that. He was probably going to take it to burn stuff, probably maybe the blankets, any evidence, in my opinion. I think that was the reason for the gas can. I think a big thing, about the 111-minute phone call, I think that was an ultimatum time. I think Nicole Kessinger gave him an ultimatum on that night. She knew Shanann was coming home. Chris had probably been telling her that he's going through this separation, it's going to happen. He keeps telling her this, and she's probably thinking, well, nothing's happening. Shanann's coming home now. We're not going to have the 6 week. We're not going to have time to ourselves. You need to make a decision. It's me or your family. And I think I didn't for a second think she had murder on her mind. I mean, she knew they would never get away with anything like that. I don't think she's that stupid. But I think she knew that, that sort of conversation in text and what have you, she's saying this because she wants him, and all of a sudden he murders his family. I think she knows how that's going to look, and I think people can probably relate to that and think, my God, this makes me look as guilty as hell. And I think that's probably most likely why she panicked and started doing all of this suspect stuff, and why she's trying to distance herself from as much as possible from what happened and her part, in the affair. I mean, Nicole Kessinger, she does seem, doesn't she, very self-serving. She's in complete damage control mode through her interviews. She didn't come across very well at all. She didn't look like she had any empathy. She didn't care for Shanann or Chris's marriage or the children. But at the end of the day, that's not a crime. As callous and as harsh as that sounds, and as cold as it sounds, she doesn't know Chris's family. She's not interested. She just wants Chris, right? And that comes across in her interviews. But at the end of the day, she didn't even bother to lawyer up, did she? If her father's such a powerful, wealthy person, why has he not even bother getting her a lawyer? And certainly if she's so guilty of all of this stuff, why is she not lawyering up? She didn't once during interviews question what Chris was saying about her either, did she? You'd think she'd be pretty paranoid, right, if she was in a situation there in her interrogations where she knows that Chris, who's also being interrogated, knows that she was all a part of it, yet she's not interested at any point in what Chris is saying about her. And I think that says a lot. She did come forward. She come forward 4 or 5 times. Yeah, she kept saying that she forgot stuff and what have you. I think she was being very calculated in what she was saying because she was worried about being incriminated. But everything she said pretty much added up. I mean, the day they met, I don't believe they met any earlier than when they said. There were emails that corroborated the fact they met in June. They both said that. There's a lot of stuff they both say in their interrogations that do match up. So I think their relationship was as they said. I don't think there's anything different about that. People are trying to say that they met back in 2017. I don't believe it. And people say, yes, she looked up Shanann whatever years before. Was she stalking them? At the end of the day, she looked them up 3 or 4 times in a couple of years. Not really stalker behaviour. And let's face it, a lot of women, if they're interested in a man, they're going to look them up. I don't think there's anything suspect in that. I think a lot of that is very much blown up. But I do think that she looked at all of this and she really thought that she could be incriminated in all of this. Particularly as I think she probably gave him an ultimatum. She was probably worried that they were going to look at all that and see her as not a victim but a real integral player in this whole event, which she was, but criminally in a court of law basis she wasn't guilty of anything other than possibly obstructing justice, you might say, but they didn't need her in the end anyway. So yeah, I don't believe, and we know the case is closed. Nothing's ever gonna come down on Nicole Kessinger. For as much as people hate her, she is not gonna be brought into this case anymore. It's done, it's closed. People are gonna have to move on, and you just need to start looking at Chris Watts to find the answers to this case, in my opinion, and hopefully then you'll be able to put it to bed. And it's said by a lot of people it was a perfect storm, and ultimately, tragically, it brought to light a very psychologically and emotionally disturbed and broken man in Chris Watts. And I use that term loosely because Chris Watts isn't a man for the evil act that he's done. he will always be remembered as a monster. But I hope, if you've made it this far, I hope you found it a little bit insightful or interesting. That's the conclusion that I have come to. That's how I'm able to, put this case to rest. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, Nico, God rest their souls, they were completely innocent victims in all of this. Chris Watts is an evil man for doing what he did, and he needs to rot in jail for the rest of his life. But it was ultimately his decisions, his choices, and his actions which was the reason for the tragic, the reason we're talking about this case, such a tragic case, is down to one single man, and that is Christopher Lee Watts.